Men stood in that trading post. One sold her, one bought her, and one, with his last dollar and empty pockets, set her free. This is how love begins on the frontier.
Welcome to Shadow of the West. Subscribe and ring the bell for more legendary tales of love, courage, and the untamed frontier.
Dalton Springs was supposed to be a brief stop. Water the horse, buy supplies, find work for the season, move on when the work dried up. The same pattern he had followed across Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, and now Kansas. The life of a man who was always arriving and always leaving, because staying meant building something, and building something meant having something to lose. He tied his horse outside the trading post and walked inside, looking for a meal and a conversation about ranch work. He found something else entirely. Margaret Yates was 23 years old. She had hair the color of wheat before harvest, and blue eyes that had once held the brightness of someone who believed the future would be kind. That brightness had dimmed, not extinguished. Dimmed. Like a lamp turned low in a room where no one visits anymore. She stood near the back of the trading post. Behind her husband, behind his shadow, in the particular posture of a woman who had learned to make herself small, hands folded, eyes on the floor, shoulders drawn inward, as if trying to occupy as little space as the world would allow. Her husband was Owen Yates. He had the face of a man who smiled too easily and meant none of it. He was a gambler who called himself a businessman, a drinker who called himself sociable, a man whose charm lasted exactly as long as it took to get what he wanted, after which it vanished like smoke. Margaret had married him in Missouri 4 years earlier. He had presented himself as a cattleman heading west. She had believed him because she was 19, and belief was the only currency she possessed. By the time she understood the truth, she was already trapped. Not by walls or chains, by circumstance. By the frontier's particular cruelty toward women who found themselves alone and without resources. Owen owed money to everyone in Dalton Springs. He owed money to card players in 3 neighboring towns. His debts had accumulated the way dust accumulates on the frontier. Steadily, invisibly. Until one day you look around and everything is covered. The largest debt was owed to a man named Harlan Cobb. Cobb owned the biggest cattle operation in the territory. He was not a man who forgave. He was not a man who waited. He was a man who collected what was owed with the certainty of weather. Things fell toward Harlan Cobb because he ensured they had no other direction to fall. Cobb was seated at a table near the back of the trading post when Owen approached, with Margaret trailing behind, like a shadow attached to something it did not choose. "I have a proposition," Owen said. His voice carried the false brightness of a man selling something he knows is worthless. "I am listening," Cobb replied. Owen stepped aside. He gestured toward Margaret the way a man gestures toward livestock at market, open-handed, presenting. "My wife. She is a hard worker. She can cook, clean, mend, and manage a household. I am offering her in exchange for the full settlement of my debt." The trading post did not fall silent the way it does in stories. The world simply continued. Men heard the words and absorbed them the way the frontier absorbed everything. Without objection, without surprise, with the quiet acceptance of people who had witnessed worse and expected nothing better from human nature. Margaret felt something inside her collapse, not dramatically, quietly. The way a structure fails when the last supporting beam finally gives way after years of bearing weight. It was never designed to carry. She did not cry. She did not speak. She kept her eyes on the floor and felt the last small flame of belief that she mattered flicker violently in the wind of her husband's words. Cobb studied her the way a man studies a purchase he did not request, but might accept if the terms were favorable. He nodded slowly. "She will do," he said. Owen's face flooded with relief. The obscene relief of a man who has escaped consequence by offering someone else in his place. And then, a voice spoke from the corner of the room. "How much?" It was quiet, not threatening, not dramatic. A question asked plainly by someone who had been sitting unnoticed near the window, watching everything with hazel eyes that carried the quietest kind of resolve. Every head turned. Caleb Dunn was standing now. His hat was on the table beside a cup of coffee he had not finished. His lean frame cast a long shadow across the wooden floor. He looked at no one except Cobb. "How much is the debt?" he repeated. Owen answered. He named the figure. It was substantial. More money than most men in the territory earned in a year of honest labor. Caleb reached into his coat. He pulled out the leather pouch. He opened it and counted the contents onto the counter. Bills and coins, worn and creased. The accumulated savings of 7 years of ranch work, fence building, horse breaking, and sleeping in barns. Everything he had, every dollar, every cent. It matched the debt, close enough that the difference was meaningless. He pushed the money across the counter toward Cobb. "The debt is paid," Caleb said. His voice was steady. "She owes nothing. He owes nothing. It is finished." The room was quiet now, genuinely quiet. The kind of silence that occurs when something unexpected interrupts the ordinary cruelty of daily life and forces every person present to reconsider what they thought they knew about the world. Cobb looked at the money. He counted it. He pocketed it. He stood. "Debt is settled," he said, and he walked out. Owen stared at Caleb with the bewildered expression of a man who cannot comprehend generosity because he has never experienced or practiced it. His mouth opened to form words. Caleb looked at him, simply looked, and whatever Owen saw in those hazel eyes was enough to close his mouth permanently. Then Caleb turned to Margaret. She was standing in the same spot, same posture, same eyes on the floor. Her body had not moved during the entire exchange because she had learned that stillness was the safest shape she could take in any room where men made decisions about her life. Caleb did not touch her. He did not reach for her hand. He did not make promises or declarations. He did not tell her she was safe. He did not tell her what to do. He said only this: "You are free. You do not belong to him. You do not belong to Cobb. You do not belong to me. You are free to walk out that door and go wherever you choose." Margaret looked up. For the first time in years, she lifted her eyes from the floor and looked directly at the face of the man speaking to her. His face was tired. His pockets were empty. His future was as uncertain as the dust floating in the shafts of light around them. "Why?" she whispered. "Because no person is a debt," he said, "and no person should pay for someone else's failure." He picked up his hat. He turned toward the door. He was leaving, expecting nothing, claiming nothing, walking back into the anonymity of the frontier with less than he arrived with. "Wait," she said. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe. "Where will you go?" A faint smile crossed his face, the exhausted smile of a man who has just given away his entire future and has not yet considered what comes next. "I have not thought that far ahead," he said. "Neither have I," she replied softly. "Perhaps we could figure it out together." He looked at her. She looked at him. And in the dusty light of a Kansas trading post, something began that neither of them had planned for. Not love, not yet. Something that comes before love. Trust. The fragile, terrifying, extraordinary trust between two people who have nothing left except each other. They did not leave together that day. Caleb would not allow it. The first thing he had given her was a choice, and he refused to let haste take it away before she understood what it meant. He found work at a stable, mucking stalls for $1 a day and a hayloft to sleep in. Margaret stayed at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Gentry, who offered a room in exchange for kitchen work when she heard the story. Owen left Dalton Springs in August, quietly, before dawn, the way cowards leave. Margaret felt nothing when she heard. He had become irrelevant. A chapter in a book she was no longer reading. Caleb brought firewood to the boarding house each evening. He stacked it beside the door and left without knocking. Margaret left coffee on the porch railing for him, a tin cup, warm and waiting. No note, no invitation, wood and coffee. Their first conversation, conducted entirely without words. More honest than any words Margaret had heard in 4 years of marriage. She began visiting him at the stable. Some visits were silent. She stood at the stall door watching him brush a horse with long, patient strokes. Other visits stretched into conversations that reached places neither of them had allowed another person to see. He told her about Alma, about the promise he made at her grave, about the crack it left in him that never healed, but that he refused to cover up, because covering it would mean forgetting why it was there. She told him about Missouri, about the girl she used to be, about the books she read and the poetry she wrote, and the dreams she carried west in a trunk that Owen sold within a month of arriving. She told him she used to write poetry. He asked her to recite some. She said she could not remember any. He said the words would come back when they were ready. Caleb saved enough by autumn to rent a small piece of land south of town. He built a cabin with his own hands. 1 room, a stone fireplace, a porch facing west toward the sunset. He did not ask Margaret to join him. He did not propose. He did not assume that his act at the trading post entitled him to anything. Instead, he did something no man in her life had ever done. He waited. He waited for her to choose, to decide on her own terms what she wanted, who she wanted, whether she wanted anyone at all. She made her choice on a Sunday afternoon in October. She walked to his cabin carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. She found him on the porch, sanding a piece of wood for a shelf. She placed the bundle on the railing. "Open it," she said. Inside were pages, dozens of them, covered in her handwriting. Poetry. She had been writing every night at Mrs. Gentry's table. Poems about the plains, about freedom, about firewood stacked without being asked, about a man who gave away everything and expected nothing. Caleb read the first page, then the second. His hands were steady, but his eyes glistened with something he would never name aloud. "These are beautiful," he said. "They are yours," she said. Every word. He looked up at her. The afternoon light caught her wheat gold hair and turned it luminous. Her blue eyes, which had been fixed on the floor the first time he saw her, were looking directly at him. Open, unafraid. "You gave me a choice," she said. "The first real choice I have ever had." "And what did you choose?" She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. She looked at the sunset painting, the plains in copper and rose, and the deep aching gold that only a frontier sky produces. "This," she said. "I choose this." They married in November, on the porch. Facing the sunset, Mrs. Gentry stood as witness. Margaret wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric she had chosen herself. That small act of selection felt as significant as any vow. Caleb placed a ring on her finger, made from a horseshoe nail, bent and polished until it shone, not valuable for what it was made of, valuable for what it meant. She kept writing. Every evening after supper, words flowing from a place that Owen had tried to silence and failed. She wrote about the frontier, about the women who survived it, about the quiet men who respected them, about ordinary miracles that happen when someone chooses kindness without condition. Years later, her poems were collected in a small volume that circulated through the territory. Women read them aloud to each other in kitchens and beside fires, and on porches their husbands had built. The poems did not make Margaret famous. They made her remembered. The poem people remembered most was the shortest she ever wrote. 4 lines, written on the back of a receipt from the Dalton Springs trading post. He had $1 and a conscience. I had no name. I called my own. He gave me back my voice that day. I gave him every word I have known. The cabin still stands south of Dalton Springs. The porch still faces west. The sunset still paints the plains, each evening in colors no poem has fully captured, though Margaret came closer than most. Caleb lived to be 67. He never accumulated wealth. He never owned more than the small piece of land he built their life upon. But he was rich in the way that the frontier sometimes allowed. Rich in mornings that began with coffee shared in silence. Rich in evenings that ended with her voice reading poems aloud by the fire. Rich in the knowledge that the best thing he ever did was not building a ranch or breaking a horse or surviving an winter. It was kneeling down to the level of his own conscience and refusing to look away. Margaret lived 8 years beyond him. She spent those years writing, not with grief, with gratitude. Her final poem, found beside her bed, the morning she passed, was addressed to no one and to everyone. I was once worth less than a debt. A man I never met said no. He paid what he could not afford. And I became everything he let me grow. They buried her beside Caleb on the ridge. Behind the cabin, 2 simple stones, side by side, facing the sunset they watched together for 26 years. The wild flowers grow between the stones each spring. No one plants them. They simply appear, the way kindness appears, without announcement, without demand. Growing in the space between 2 people who chose each other, not because the world told them to, but because they understood something the world often forgets, that the most powerful thing you can give another person is not your money, not your name, not your protection. It is a choice, the freedom to decide who they are, who they want to be, where they want to stand. And if they choose to stand beside you, that is not ownership, that is love. The kind the frontier could not break, the kind that outlasts the dust and the wind, and the long, slow turning of seasons across the plains. The kind that begins not with taking, but with letting go, and trusting that what comes back is real.